Welcome to our final installment of our Psalms study. We're going to be looking at Psalm 120. Thanksgiving is a lifestyle, not just a holiday. Now, I know as Americans, we think of Thanksgiving as a once a year modern holiday full of family and turkey. I love this picture from Norman Rockwell. Of course, now the occasion is a little muddled with football, obviously, a fumble there. Going out Black Friday shopping, which seems to be encroaching on Thanksgiving Thursday more and more, binge watching Hulu, and going out to a movie of a blockbuster that's opening on Thanksgiving Day. But still, we can remove all these things and admit that we take a day to take stock of what's most important in life and what the Lord has provided. Like the old hymn, Count Your Blessings. That's what Thanksgiving is all about. Well, in Psalm 120, it is a Thanksgiving psalm. And Thanksgiving psalms can be both individual and communal, just like lament psalms that we studied before. They can be individual, but they can also be of a national nature. It focuses on the deliverance that comes from God. There is a difference between lament and thanksgiving. Lament expresses the depth of despair going on, in the very soul of the individual or the community. Whereas Thanksgiving, even though it may touch on that, it's where God provides a response, relief, salvation, creating a circumstance of gratitude. And so while lament may be, both individual and communal, just like Thanksgiving Psalms, the content differs in that lament tends to focus on the disparity, whereas Thanksgiving Psalms seem to focus on God's provision. So there are two indicators whether a psalm is really a Thanksgiving psalm. Number one is they will state the crisis or need. That makes it sound like a lament, but it always ends with thanks to God for his intervention into the circumstance. This psalm is in the final book of the 5 books that comprise what we now have as the book of Psalms. But Psalm 120 is also part of something else. It's an individual thanksgiving psalm, but it has the superscription, a song of ascents. It can also mean a song of the ascents, with the definite article being there. And it seems to be part of a collection of 15 psalms bearing this kind of title. They go from Psalm 120, this one, all the way to Psalm 134. But why? Well, some people think these were psalms used on spiritual pilgrimages, that when somebody was taking a spiritual pilgrimage to Jerusalem or somewhere else, as we find in the Bible, these were the psalms they used along the way. And hence the definite article, this a song of the ascents, as the group was traveling, ascending to the location they were destined to reach. Others believe that it could be in reference to a temple staircase mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 40, and that these ascents are actually the steps you took to ascend to a different part of the temple. And so our study of Psalm 120 is not only about thanksgivings, but also a taste of the songs of ascent that were used during perhaps a journey to Jerusalem, or perhaps during the Festival of Tabernacles by the Levites. So let's look at Psalm 120. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. Well, right here in verse 1, we begin to see the difference between a thanksgiving and a lament. The simple phrase, He answered me. He delivered me out of my distress. This makes it a thanksgiving psalm. And by the way, also note that verse 1 is in the past tense. Uh, some people miss this. Some translations miss this. He called out. It's in the past. It isn't present. Whereas many laments are in the present. In addition to that, we believe verse 2 makes this a last prayer, a personal echo of the distress that he is giving, that he is showing. Moving on, verses 3 and 4. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? A warrior's sharp arrows with glowing coals of the broom tree. Well, verse 3, it seems like God is the implied subject. He's the talker, he's the speaker here. He is the one who is speaking, giving, doing to the psalmist. And he says there's these two metaphors about those tongues, those deceitful words. He says, first, they are like the sharp arrows of a warrior. Which is also found elsewhere in the Bible, Psalm 57:5, and James chapter 3 also reminds us of the use of the tongue for evil. He also says those tongues can be like coals of the broom tree, which is the trunk of the broom brush that provided very hard wood and produced a higher grade charcoal than other woods in the ancient Near East. So it was frequently used for creating hot fires and longer lasting coals. Okay, we're going to continue reading with verses 5 through 7, which continue with his lament. But remember, this is a thanksgiving psalm because he's repeating the lament to talk about the deliverance the Lord gives, the thankfulness he has that God, in fact, intervened and answered his prayer. Starting here in verse 5 through 7. Woe to me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Now, we may not have our Near East geography in mind, but if you're wondering where is Meshech, Meshech is in the kingdom of Central Anatolia. It's modern day Turkey. It was later conquered by Sargon II of Assyria, and even after that, invaded by the Cimmerians from southern Russia. Not Sumerians from Mesopotamia, but the Cimmerians, Cimmerans, from southern Russia. In addition to that, he says he dwelt in the tents of Kedar, the second son of Ishmael, according to Genesis 25:13. His descendants formed a tribe called Kedar in Assyrian, and even in late Babylonian texts, they're mentioning as having flourished in the Arabian Peninsula from the 8th to the 4th centuries BC. Now, a quick note that Meshech and Kedar are on opposite directions from Israel. Israel located here, it goes both north and south, indicating that they are remote regions from his homeland, and that he has dwelt for too long among people who are not his countrymen and in fact want to do ill to his country and to him. Let's take a little more time with those last two verses, verses 6 and 7, where he kind of compares himself from war makers versus peacemakers. In verses 6 and 7, he says, Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Well, notice first he says, my dwelling. In Hebrews, The Hebrew language, it conveys the idea of journeying as an alien, as a foreigner through a foreign land, perhaps referring specifically to the ones that we just mentioned, the two countries, the two people groups. And he makes the affirmation that he is for peace. But in Hebrew, it's actually a little more forceful. It isn't just that I am for peace. In Hebrew, he actually says, I am peace. I am peace. And yet all around me do what? They want war. Probably attesting to the fact that those areas are not as civilized as Israel, or at least portraying them as such. Just one final note on the Psalms of Ascent. Uh, these verses oftentimes repeat after one another. They'll pick up on a word and then they'll repeat it in the very next stanza or the next verse. Not always, but it's readily apparent in the Hebrew text, and fortunately in the ESV, they've tried to hold to that literal translation. So, for example, we see in verses 1 and 2, the Lord and O Lord. In verse 2, you have tongue. Verse 3, the word tongue. Verse 5, the word dwell. Verse 6, the word dwelling. Verse 6, the word peace. And verse 7, the word peace. And so each verse seems to build on top of the next very, very, rhythmically. And hence this is another feature of the Psalms of Ascent that we see here. So if you're using your journal, you can pull it out and start taking some notes. When was the last time you voiced your thanks to God for his provision, care, and attention in times of distress? Why is it sometimes difficult to do this? What gets in the way of us being more thankful? When was a time that God answered you in a time of distress? Can you actually think of an occasion where that happened? And have you ever relied on God when in unfamiliar territory or surrounded by those hostile toward you? When? Once again, we're thankful that you've joined us in our study of Psalms. We hope to see you at Heritage Christian Church. If you can't make it to our campus, you can always email or call me at the addresses on the screen. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's well worth it. You can experience our worship, our sermons, our lessons, and get some glimpses into the life of Heritage Christian Church in Fayetteville, Georgia. Hope to see you Sunday.